Good morning to you, Colin. Is this a binary event for the South African economy?
Absolutely. I think it's the single most important event since the advent of democracy when Mandela became president, as it's really the moment where South Africa chooses to continue on the road of state capture under President Zuma for the last decade, or to reinvigorate the ruling African National Congress with the election of a platform to modernize the party and undertake an economic recovery plan.
Colin, do you think either will be able to stave off? I think it's even Ramaphosa is going to find it difficult to put a budget together in February that is going to sort of put South Africa easily back on the road to recovery. Even his economic policies are going to struggle in this environment. Do you think that even the optimism surrounding Ramaphosa is being overdone?
Look, I think it's a hugely challenging moment. We are facing a potential fiscal cliff in South Africa with the budget in February being the point at which Moodys have instructed the markets they will determine whether to downgrade South Africa, and with it, whether South Africa stays within the Citibank World Government Bond Index or not. And to the extent that Cyril Ramaphosa does prevail, he will have to move very speedily to effect a new team, put in place a social compact between business, government and labour to drive this economic reform program. The good news is I think the last period has been one in which those sectors, government, business and labour, have moved closer, and there's an acknowledgement of the power of civil society, business and labour to effect economic reform. And the other bit of good news is I think that Cyril Ramaphosa has put forward a new deal, what he calls an economic new deal, which sets out his economic priorities. So I think he has a clear idea of what he needs to do. He has to put the team together and effect that. That will likely require him, Guy, to effect a recall of President Zuma if he prevails, because it's only with the appointment of a cabinet and with the appointment of state-owned enterprise leadership that he will effectively be able to control the economic levers required to effect this economic recovery.
How does it look right now, Colin? I mean, you talk about the state capture of Zuma's administration. I assume that means that many in the ANC are particularly loyal to him, as often happens in such situations. And I'm guessing that Ramaphosa has a lot more support among the people of South Africa outside, really, of the party. How does it look as far as the odds on Ramaphosa getting in?
Well, just to capture, as you say, the recent polls have suggested that the ANC membership as a whole, and in fact the people of South Africa, would very much like Cyril Ramaphosa to prevail. But the vested interests in the party itself are extremely deep, and this is causing a very fine split between the pro and anti-Cyril Ramaphosa forces. Those supporting Nkosazana Zuma as the candidate to prevail effectively have huge amounts of vested interest, economic benefits, riding on the state continuing to be able to deliver to party members these resources, and particularly to the elite. So, all of the provincial barons, the leaders of local governments that have benefited under Jacob Zuma have so much to lose. And of course, that cascades right up to the top, including President Zuma himself, who stands to face various charges that are before the courts.
What does this mean for businesses in South Africa? I mean, assuming that Ramaphosa were to win, you've acknowledged that there are not only people but unionists as well as communists behind his economic plan. Are we looking at kind of a free market capitalist economic plan, or how will it affect businesses that are invested in South Africa?
Well, the Cyril Ramaphosa plan is very much a mixed economy plan with the National Development Plan of the ruling ANC as its platform. Nkosazana Zuma's alternative is very much a state interventionist model, with the independence of the Reserve Bank being called into question, land restitution without compensation, and mining being nationalized as her major policy platforms. So there's enormous difference between the economic outlook of the two people, but more importantly, in a way, the management style and the management outlook of the economy under these two candidates would be absolutely chalk and cheese. I think that Cyril Ramaphosa would be able to bring the best of business, government and labor into the administration, into his administration, and drive, a thoughtful economic program, albeit with lots of state elements, state interventionist elements to it. So I think business understands the need to transform South Africa, the need for South Africa to grow and at the same time grow in an inclusive way because of the degree of inequality and unemployment in the society. And perhaps too little has happened in that regard in the last 23 years. But we can't have transformation in South Africa without growth. So driving growth is the number one priority, and the Ramaphosa plan suggests a 2 to 3% target in 2018, growing to 5% over the 2018 to the 2023 period within a 5-year outlook. The Nkosazana Zuma plan talks very much about the state delivering resources to the people, but doesn't really define a growth plan at all.
Colin, if we were to see Ramaphosa winning and you were to see foreign direct investment picking up, where would that FDI come from? Would it be Russia? Would it be China? Sort of who's lining up behind him on the international stage?
No, I think across the world, people are looking at South Africa and making their minds up about, the environment for that investment. I think it's from the United States through European investors, French companies, Japanese companies, right through to Chinese companies who I think are universally asking the same question: will South Africa be a place where it will be stable, where we will have an anti-corruption campaign, create an environment in which business can be done? Business has been very resilient through the last decade, notwithstanding the pressures. And will that be able to continue, or will an anti-market administration really clamp down and become more interventionist in the private sector as it has been in the state?
Colin, let me just ask you a question about the Moodys story. Moodys has indicated that we have to wait until next year before a decision is ultimately made. But if we were to see this going the wrong way, certainly the wrong way as you described it, and South Africa ending up seeing some significant capital flight, do you think that decision may come earlier than the beginning of next year? Do you think actually Moodys is sitting there waiting to press the button Monday morning?
Well, I don't know Monday morning, but it's perfectly possible that they will take an accelerated course pre the budget, to the extent that whoever's elected has policy platforms that have no hope of structural reform, which is what's driven them. And I think the markets, particularly the currency market, is going to react very, very quickly and discount quickly the results of the leadership election. I think on that, it's probable that there will be some further strengthening if Cyril Ramaphosa wins. It's already come down from 14.50 Rand dollar to 13.50 in the last month on the expectation in the markets that Cyril may prevail. But should Nkosazana Zuma prevail, there will be weakness, and I think potentially quite a sharp weakness on the back of her victory.
Just kind of quantify. I got a chart. Actually, we can see the 1 week volatility that we've got a chart here for, Colin. You won't be able to see it, but it kind of highlights what we're talking about here. The white line here is the 1 week volatility, which obviously captures this week's event. Just talk to me about the magnitude of the capital flights if NDZ does win.
Well, I think to the extent Moodys does downgrade South Africa, that will be $10 billion, up to $10 billion of bond selling that will flow. That's probably equivalent to somewhere around 50 cents on the Rand dollar exchange rate itself. But I think far more importantly, it will be about sentiment. When you look at Macron's France and what happened on the back of his victory and the positive sentiment and investor flows that resulted versus what would happen in South Africa on the back of a bad outcome for the markets from a market perspective, I think we can potentially see quite significant outflows. And certainly we would not see the inflows We might see some, but we won't see the degree of inflows that we would witness should Cyril Ramaphosa win. So, you know, South African citizens are watching this with a great amount of interest. The international community are very much engaged. Obviously, South Africa is not the only place in the world where corruption exists, but this is our chance to defeat corruption and put South Africa back on the road to a modern economic recovery.
Can I just take you a little bit further north, Colin? ZANU-PF is meeting at the moment, and it's obviously under new leadership. How interrelated are these two stories? What is happening up in Harare and what is happening in Pretoria, and the kind of the relationship between the two governments and the outcome of what happens with the ANC this weekend?
It's been a very interesting period, particularly actually with regards to what's going on in Angola itself and in Zimbabwe, where you've had very strong people like Mugabe and Dos Santos sweep from power in the last period. I think the long-range issue is South Africa is one of the major countries in Africa, Nigeria and Egypt. When the engine rooms stutter, then obviously Africa's future is much dimmer. But if the lights come on, the engines fire on all cylinders in these countries, then Africa's future becomes much brighter. And so it may or may not be that Zimbabwe recovers. I happen to be one of the more skeptical people in that regard in the short term. But I think South Africa will send a signal about where Africa is going as a continent on the back of, is it electing a reform and economic modernizing person to lead the party or not?
All right. Hey, Colin, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it this morning. Colin Coleman is Managing Director and Head of Sub-Saharan Africa offices at Goldman Sachs. Thank you so much for joining us on this really important issue that people need to pay attention to over the weekend from South Africa.